Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first board engagement support webinar brought to you by Indiana Youth Institute and the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project, Effective Governance, Building a Collaborative Board Culture. Thank you for joining us over your lunch break today. My name is Cassie Wade. I'm the Vice President of Youth Worker Wellbeing here with Indiana Youth Institute. We are grateful for the chance to connect with you as a community of Indiana youth workers committed to meeting the needs of our youth and children. For those of you not familiar with Indiana Youth Institute, our mission is to improve the lives of all Indiana children by strengthening and connecting the people, the organizations, and the communities that are focused on kids and youth. Here with the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project, we are a collaborative statewide effort to improve the lives of Indiana's youth workers so that you can work more effectively with youth across the state. The foundation of the project is collaboration, and the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project is a collaboration between intermediate organizations, the Indiana After School Network, IARCA, Institute for Excellence, Indiana Youth Institute, Indiana Youth Services Association, and Marion County Commission on Youth, and we're grateful for their partnership. Before we begin, if you've been on our IYI webinars before, you know this, but a couple technical pointers that will help you engage with today's webinar. So for technical support, use the chat feature. We have our IYI team on. Send us a message and we will help you. You can also use the chat feature to converse with the group. So chat with the group. We want to hear from you, right? We want to hear, the presenter wants to hear from you. We also encourage you to ask questions. So we have the Q&A feature for any questions that you may have, and we will get to as many of those as possible. And there's also an option for you to upvote any great questions to the top. So if somebody asks a question and you think it's a great question, upvote it to the top. And then at the end of today's presentation and in a follow-up email, you will receive a link to complete an evaluation of this webinar. We want your feedback. So please take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about today's presentation. And if you don't receive the evaluation email, check your junk because sometimes the email gets directed there. And once you complete the evaluation, you'll be redirected to a certificate of participation. Like many of today's IYI webinars, today's webinar will also be posted on our website if you want to rewatch it or if you want to share the opportunity and listen in with a partner. We are excited today to kick off our board engagement support services with our partner from Loring Sternberg and Associates. These services, as a part of the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project, are designed for youth serving organization leaders to increase your capacity and your confidence working with your board of directors. And why? Because we know that strong board of directors improve the support and the working conditions of youth workers. So what's included? Well, you're here today for the start of a 4-part webinar series led by Board Source certified experts. And then at the end of today's webinar, we're going to share more with you about an opportunity to apply for 2 individualized board engagement coaching sessions for up to 25 eligible youth serving organizations. And then also the opportunity for a Board Source annual subscription for those organizations that are participating in the coaching sessions. So lots of exciting things to be able to support you in working with your board. Our presenter today is Dave Sternberg, founding partner at Loring Sternberg and Associates, And with more than 30 years of experience and a senior governance consultant with BoardSource, he has a wealth of information to share with you today. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Good afternoon. It's almost there's probably some parts of the state where it's not exactly afternoon, but it's afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you, Cassie. Excited to lend our expertise and our knowledge and share with all of the youth serving organizations some good governance practices and tools. You will see in future webinars a couple colleagues of mine that I work with who are terrific, and collectively, I think we're going to offer you a lot of really good information. What I ask of you as we go through all of this is, not everything is going to fit everyone at every moment. And so think about collectively what are the tools, the ideas, the concepts that are really helpful to you in your situation where you are. You'll probably hear my colleagues say that governance is a journey. And if you've worked with one board, you've worked with one board. The cultures and I mean, there's just so many differences, but there's a lot of good best practices. We're going to share those. As I I'm going to back up here real quick. If you could share with me in chat, so you get your fingers on that keyboard there, and Cassie now watch chat for a second together. What are challenges that you have with your board? You may be a staff member who's working with the board. You may be a member of the board. Anything that you want to share that is here's a challenge, I'm not looking for things that are particularly bad or good, just issues that come up. Anyone want to share? There's quite a few attendees. Board recruitment, that's very, very common. That's one of our sessions, if I recall, Cassie, and board transition, recruitment. Yep. Um, okay. Creating the foundation of a board. Okay. So, lack of follow through, fundraising. Imagine that. That's so rare that that comes up. I kind of, it's just, cooperation, communication. Okay. And keep sharing. What you'll see is, collectively, as you even watch the chat, what you'll see is a combination of two things. One is tactically, what are our challenges? Some of these things are tactical, and then some of them are culture related, are the way we behave and interact, adaptive, as some people might use that term. So I think what we prepared for you globally in the four sections is going to be terrific. But I'm going to get started. You keep sharing those thoughts and ideas. Let me start with offering you some thoughts on the things that impact how we function from an external standpoint. So think about either you're a staff member and you're interacting with your board, or you're a board member. What are some of the forces that impact how we operate? Well, I have a nice little list. Here's my list. One is politics of the day impact how our board functions. We as individuals carry all of those issues with us. And this is a neutral statement. So, what's happening in our world politically can be a challenge. The other is the state of the economy. And usually, when I hear about the state of the economy, it has to do with fundraising, but the state of the economy. And as you know, in the youth serving world, the state of the economy is relevant because it impacts perhaps your funding. It impacts perhaps the number of individuals you're serving because of economic conditions. So, the state of the economy has an impact on how we function as a board. Generation. So I just saw a report, I believe it came from the Lilly School of Philanthropy and the fundraising school, but there's an uptick in volunteerism. Generations volunteer differently, and that impacts how we function because we're bringing people to our board from different generations that think differently and operate differently and have different expectations, and that plays a role in how effective we're going to be. Um, Technology. I'm old, and so this kind of frightens me. But I remember a time when I started my consulting practice where we didn't have websites. I mean, that was like a new thing. And now we're talking about the age of AI and how AI can be a tool that might help us create efficiencies and effectiveness. But fundraising software and the use of texting. And I mean, the technology has an impact on our organizations and ultimately how we govern. And in addition to that, one thing was I learned recently that if you're doing meetings virtually, you want to be careful about that and whether or not someone is using an AI tool to take notes. Sometimes that's not a protected environment, and that might go out into the public. So things to think about there. Other things that impact are sort of what's happening in the world of justice, and this is a big this has a big impact on ultimately how we operate and serve youth, ultimately working its way into the board and how we view this externally and how it impacts how we both function as people, but also how our board is going to function. And then there's regulations. And so, and these tend to be very tactical things, but these are things we're required to do. We have to make sure we're, having an independent financial review, getting our 990 at both the federal and state level. What are those things that are required of us, that take time and energy? And speaking of time, time is an external force. One of the things that a lot of board members share with me is they wish that they had more time in the day. Not all of us wish we had more time in the day, and there's only so much time we as board members can devote as volunteers. And I'm going to shout out to my staff that are with us today. You work more hours than you're probably compensated for, quite frankly, but there's only so much time to do the work that a staff has to do. And then we have internal forces. What are the things that impact how we operate that are internal to us? One is the history of both how the organization has evolved and how the board has evolved. Many nonprofits, as many of you probably know, evolve over time in a way where the early board is doing programs or delivering services versus an advanced period where fundraising and being a community advocate becomes important. That's a different skill set. So the history of how we've evolved is important. The other thing is we function in a way that's really kind of a combination of two things. One is old habits and new habits. Okay. So those are my two things. So, I encourage boards to ask themselves, why do you do what you do? I'll give you an example. We meet every second Thursday of every month. And I'll say, well, why do you do that? And the answer could be, that's what we've always done. That's an old habit. It could be, we pulled the board and this was the best time to meet and this time of day, which is an effectiveness and efficiency, a new habit, a new way of operating. And we have to be cognizant of what are old legacy behaviors versus what are new behaviors that are going to advance our work forward. The other thing, back similarly to external forces, is um, the notion that we are made up of a whole lot of different kinds of people and I sort of generations. So we are both serving different generations, but we are leading with different generations. And what does that make up to us? What does that do to us? How do we have to be cognizant of what that looks like as we go forward? And then my final internal forces is the reputation that we carry, both as a board and as an organization, right? So while it's external in that it's how we're viewed externally, we help to create that reputation in the community. So things that I want to acknowledge impact how you function, exist. I want to make you aware of them. And just, I realize that showing up at a board meeting and doing the work of a board is impacted by a lot of different things that we don't speak of. And so I want to want to recognize that. But um, one of the things I like to keep in mind is as a board member, I want you to think about this. You have a fiduciary responsibility to sustain the whole enterprise. Your job as a board member is to ensure that the organization is moving forward. I often say, status quo is going backwards. So you have the responsibility to make sure that the enterprise is moving forward. But you also are a member of a team and you have to work in collaboration with the rest of the board and the executive. Now, I only bring this up because, as you can imagine, I have a lot of client interaction where certain board members feel that they have certain authority and rights that other board members don't have. And as a board, that isn't true. The president has the same and equal voice as someone who's not the president. There might be some different responsibilities, but that role is the same, and we all have to be collaborative. And finally, as the individual, you are bringing those expertise and experience and some of your talents forward to move the organization forward. And I offer this context because we join a board and we think of ourselves. And I want you to broaden that a little bit and understand I'm part of the group, and this is how this group functions in my place in it. Now, one of the comments when I said some of the challenges with your board were a couple of people noticed recruitment and engagement. And what I find is that most of this starts with understanding what the role of a board is. Now, that has two impacts. One is, well, if I'm on the board, do I know what the role of a nonprofit board is? That's number one. And two, if I'm going to recruit board members, do I know what the role of a nonprofit board should be? Because then I can find the individuals that make fulfilling these responsibilities possible. So I use the 10 basic responsibilities from board sources you see here. And I'm going to go through the 10. And here's what I ask of you. If you, as I go through and describe them, if you believe that one of the responsibilities I describe is something that is a real opportunity for improvement for your board, write that number down. Note for yourself, this is maybe something we don't do as well as we should, or it's a giant area for improvement. Everyone can improve in every area, but look for those things in particular that, if to be blunt, are a problem or a challenge we're not executing at a high level. So, first is setting direction. So, determining the mission and purpose. Now, many of your organizations are old enough that the mission and purpose was developed prior to you joining the board. Okay. And don't confuse this with wordsmithing the words. I'm talking the actual mission and purpose. Okay. If you went from youth serving to serving animals, like a humane society, that's a complete change of mission. That's what I'm talking about. But now your mission and purpose has been determined. Your role is simply to ask yourselves periodically, are we being consistent with that mission and purpose? Again, you have the right to change it. You can wordsmith it. Are we being consistent? Two is ensure organizational planning. So, does your organization have a strategic plan? We could spend multiple sessions on how to do a strategic plan, what it should look like, what it should include. This is more a simple question. Is there a strategic direction? And I want to emphasize that it is something the board has the responsibility of ensuring is accomplished, and they participate in it. They, as a body, set the direction. I do not think they set that direction without input and influence and engaging appropriate staff. So if your staff, don't worry. But should not be an environment where the staff puts together a plan and the board puts a check mark and approves it. That is not how this works. The board sets the direction. With respect to ensuring resources, a couple things fall into this category. One is selecting the chief executive. So in the case where any organization on the call today has a CEO, a paid chief staff person, the board is in charge of selecting that person. That person is in charge of selecting and overseeing additional staff, not the board. The board is, only port of call, if you will, is that executive. The other is ensuring financial resources. The board has a role, a huge role in driving revenue into the organization. So they, as a body, should be engaging in development work. Are they giving? Are they getting? Are they opening doors? Are they advocating? Are they bringing people closer to the organization? These are the roles of a board. It isn't solely the staff's job to raise money. And, I call this sort of, do you have that philanthropic culture? Additionally, is building a competent board. Now, you saw early on, I asked what are some of the challenges that you have, and a lot of people noted recruitment. Well, that's building a competent board, and that will be a session that we do actually, but it's a board's role to make sure that they are identifying and recruiting and preparing and supporting board members to do their work. It's super important. And so this is a role of the board, right? It's not the executive or staff choosing board members. While they might have some opportunity to recommend, they're not choosing those individuals. And enhancing the public standing. Is our board out in the community, as I mentioned earlier, advocating, making connections, educating the community, state leaders, other people about the work of the organization? Huge role of the board. If you think about, you have a staff three, four, five, six, but a board of 20. If 20 people are out spreading the word, that can get us a lot further than the three, four, five, or six board staff members. An oversight function is to support and evaluate the CEO. Okay, so is there an annual performance review for the CEO? And is the CEO supported, right? Are we encouraging professional development opportunities? How are we growing the skill set of our CEO? Then we have protect our assets. And I want to make something, highlight something here, which is protecting assets does not mean, nor should it mean, spending no money and ensuring that we're super tight-fisted and we can't do our work or grow the entity. Protecting assets does require, right, making sure that there's a budget, making sure we're providing the oversight for that budget. But also, it is completely appropriate to self-invest in the organization to maybe grow the staff capacity to serve more, youth. I mean, this isn't a not the purse strings. This is be proactive about how to grow the entity within the organization. Yes. Do you want to, if you're fortunate enough to have a giant endowment, be dipping into that willy-nilly? No, but that's a policy issue. Ensuring integrity. Are you following all of the state and federal rules and guidelines? But are you also, do you have policies that are necessary? Gift acceptance policy, HR policies. We have to maintain this organization as an entity. You're a corporation. You happen to be a tax exempt corporation, but you're still a corporation. So, are you operating with high integrity and making sure that you're doing the things that are required of you? And finally, is asking good questions about the services you're delivering. Strengthened services should not be interpreted as doing or providing the services. It should be monitoring and providing the oversight to make sure they're effective, and they're accomplishing the goals that we have set out relative to sort of how we're serving those that we serve in our community. And those are the 10 roles. And so hopefully, as I've gone through them, you've jotted down the numbers of any of those that you believe your board needs to improve in. And if you have, and there might be more than one, go ahead and put those numbers in the chat so that your peers can see what you put. And it's obviously, uh, you know, we're not going to pull anyone off a mute and ask you to talk. But so we have 2 and 4. All right. Other thoughts about areas that your board could improve in? All right. 1, 5, and 9. Let's see what we get. 5 and 9. All right. 2, 5, 10. 4 and 5. 4, 5, and 6. 2, 2, 4, 5. 5 and 6. Okay. 5 comes up quite a bit. Okay. 10. So as you begin to see where your peers, I've identified things, you begin to see some commonalities in these numbers. Now, not everyone's the same. Some people are the same, but not everyone's the same. Everyone has a different set of challenges. But what I find is that when we ask this question, and let's say I'm doing a board retreat and I present this, and then have people identify the few that they really need to work on. What comes up, quite frankly, very, very commonly is 4 and 5. They're very common because they really are a reflection of how we've recruited. And that's again coming up. But I want to suggest to you that this is a reflection of how you built the board, and we're going to give you some tools to help you do that. And again, planning came up quite a bit as one of the items, which again is a board responsibility. And so, but think about how these are connected. It's hard to raise money and bring in a great board if you don't know where you're going, right? Now, these are not presented to you in an order of importance. They're simply, sort of categorized and offered. At any one moment, you could be really good at one and really not good at others. So it's not as though they have equal weight. And I will tell you from experience that number five is largely the most important. If you build with competent board members, the people you need, I'm not saying board members you have now aren't competent, but those that you need, everything else becomes exponentially easier to do. Okay. So think about those in terms of the roles of what a board does. And that's why I go back to now we can start getting into how um, we build this board because the board, as I mentioned, governs the life of the organization, right? The public trust, the accountability quotient. The CEO manages the affairs. The CEO does the daily work of the organization and has accountability to the board. Now, many of you may be looking at that saying, well, that's interesting. I already knew that. You would be shocked at how many organizations this line gets blurred, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and can be challenging. But at the board level, you want to think about, are we providing an environment where we have ample time to encourage questions? Now, this can be, we call this, creating a culture of inquiry. This can be, a, first of all, it's super healthy and you should encourage it. It can be a slippery slope. There can be people who dominate. There can be people who take you off track. Some of that is meeting management, but do you generally have an environment where questions are welcomed? And my caveat is make sure we're preparing for meetings in advance so those are meaningful questions and we're not holding things back or just being distracting to others. And listen, different viewpoints are good. Your boards range in size, and it is those different viewpoints that help us get to the best end for the organization. The other thing is just to make sure that there are unwritten rules that we function by. I talked about old and new behaviors, but that culture, the legacy behaviors that we function by. Does everyone know sort of what those rules are? Sort of what how far we're going to go with questions, what are taboo subjects, things that people are familiar with to help ensure that the conversation is moving and flowing in a good direction in a positive way. So I always encourage there being questions, but my caveat is you have to come to the meeting prepared. A good question is generally a high level question. It isn't a detailed question that was in the report or the numbers that were sent to you in advance. So does that environment exist? The other thing to think about too, relative to how the board functions and how we foster a good culture of inquiry, is how we are indeed behaving around our staff. And while there's the board component of we're going to function as a team and we're going to know the roles and we're going to accept the expectations and we're going to create accountability, that's a governance issue. So we do governance, at a high level. The board governs, okay? Then we have management functions. We have scenarios every day. The staff is doing the management. Now that seems clear to us. Now there may be times the board has to make board decisions. Some boards go into executive session. Okay, they're there. There's no staff. Like they have a responsibility. There are times the board has to make decisions, and there are certainly plenty of times where the board, in making those decisions, um, would indeed benefit from the insight of the CEO. No question about it. We'd love to have the input and the guidance. It's a great environment to be in, right? We're not acting alone, as a lone wolf, as it were. And then there's times on the management side that the staff, or excuse me, the CEO or senior staff person is making decisions. They have to every day. They can't call the board with everything that's going on and, you know, get approval for everything. And there are times when, if there's CEOs or chief staff people, executive directors here today, you want the insight of your board members. And that's a good, healthy place to be. I'll share a story to illustrate at least one way in which I've seen this operate, and it's mine personally. Um, I was the chair of an organization that was national in scope, and the board was all over the country. So, you know, we're diverse locations, and the CEO and I used to, when I started as chair, have a phone call once a month, and that phone call would have been anything on my mind or his mind. There was nothing that I didn't, you know, there was nothing I discouraged that he bring up, and vice versa. We talk about anything, and sometimes those it was a great conversation, a sharing of ideas and thoughts and perspectives, nothing to react to or work on. Sometimes he was seeking my advice, or vice versa, right? And there were times when the frequency of those calls might pick up depending on the situation, but there were times when that call did nothing but check in with each other and see how our families were doing, you know, what our holiday plans were. So we had a nice relationship, and we understood those boundaries. And he knew that I was sensitive to making sure that we understood where these boundaries were for the rest of the board, and honestly where they were for the rest of the staff. Because at the end of the day, what we want is a partnership. Because there will be moments where there are shared decisions between the board members and between the board and the CEO. Those moments will happen. And it is creating that culture where there's some give and take and a penalty-free opportunity to have conversations, where it makes working in what you see here as purple a lot easier. So, you know, as an illustration, I'm going to share with you um, some roles within organizations and tasks, if you will. And via chat, I'd love to hear from you. This is your choice. You can type one of these three responses in. Okay. So when I share these roles, I'll read some and you can put your answers in. Which of the roles, particularly the ones that I point out, are primarily the responsibilities of the board? And I use the word primarily for all of these. There's always an instance where there might be a reason that it isn't primarily, but I want to look at this, you know, everything being equal, primarily the role of the board. Which of these is primarily the role of the CEO? Okay, when you just look at it on face value, it's the CEO's job. And which of these are shared? Okay, and I have quite a few, and we're going to go through them. And you can look at the whole list. I'll read 4 or 5, and those will be the ones that I ask you as a group to respond to in chat. But as you look at them, think about the question I'm asking. What is primarily a board role? What is primarily the CEO's role or executive director? And what is primarily a shared responsibility? Okay. So if I were to ask, for example, whose role primarily is it to orient the board? What is your thought on that? Is that primarily the board's role, primarily the staff, or shared? Okay, so there's a lot of the most common answer is shared, and I'm glad I started with this question. Here's some board responses. So this is again a great illustration of the issue that I bring up, which is primarily whose job it is. Now you think about your board orientation process for your organization. Here's how I'm going to describe what would be ideal. Okay, what would be ideal is that the board orients board members and that the staff participates in that orientation process. Now, given that description, shared probably doesn't work and CEO probably doesn't work. Primarily, that's a board function. Now, Functionally, it may require staff to participate in prepping things and making copies and setting dates, but they're not the ones who are orienting the board. Okay. How about, how about, let's go to, develop programs. This side, whose job is it to develop programs? I'm feeling really good. I mean, that is definitely a CEO's job. Now, it could be if you type board, you have no staff. If you don't have a staff, that you can't say it's the CEO or staff's job. But this to me is a pretty clear. This is the primary function of the staff. In this case, my CEO or my executive director. Board members are not developing programs. We're ensuring that there's a strategy and a vision. We're making sure they're funded. We're making sure that we're, you know, meeting the expectations of us that are required. We are helping to, advocate. We're not program delivery people or experts. And so that would be the distinction there. Um, Here's a really good question for you. What about reviewing the budget? Whose job do you believe it is to review the budget? Shared primarily the board, CEO. Okay, mostly shared is our response. Okay, and Alan, who I just caught here at the end. Yes, I think you want to have an environment where you rely on your CEO to work with a finance committee of the board to help create the budget. Okay. Adopting the annual budget number 12 is a board responsibility, and oversight of that budget, right, could be shared, primarily a board function. Your job is to ensure that we are indeed, bless me, we are indeed following that budget, right? And how about, I'll pick one more. How about engaging board members? Not trying to not trying to trick anybody, but how about engaging? Whose job is it to engage the board? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, the majority of these answers are shared, which I could lean into, and I think it's shared with the understanding that the board really is in charge of the care and feeding of its young. That's what I like to say. That we are responsible to each other, right? We don't expect the CEO to do our work. And so is if that environment where we're engaging board members is, I think there's healthy rationale for staff to be involved in that, right? We're not operating in a silo. So you think about some of these other things, um, and whose primary role it is. And I think it can be helpful because it's nice to understand where those distinctions are so that we don't, as board members, micromanage and step over, which is one issue. But if we're not doing that and we're looking at a higher level and we're functioning at a high level, we can set the long-term direction. We can spend our time and energy out in the community, advocating, driving revenue, growing the institution. Really super important things to think about. So think about your CEO's primary roles, right? Financial stewardship, provide vision and perspective on where the organization's going, at high standards, engage the board in planning. I talked about it's the board's role with the influence of the staff. And one thing I didn't speak of, which is super important, is a really good board and it's some secret sauce. A really good board is supported by the staff. And I say that because board members don't always know what it is to serve on a nonprofit board. In fact, I often say the biggest mistake we can make is assuming that board members do understand. But a real solid CEO, executive director, chief staff person, they know when to when to push. They know when to ask a really pointed question. They know what support is needed. They're vital to the operation. But again, they report to the board and they're not a board member. Okay. Now you may be in a situation where you have someone who's the CEO is on a board, and I'm not speaking to the legalities of that or my opinion of that, but the environment I'm presenting is board and staff, just for the sake of today's discussion. Okay. Um, so also at the end of the day, and then I want to see what questions folks have. I want to leave plenty of time for questions or pushback or other ways of thinking. What makes a high performing board? Well, in my experience, these three things create an environment for us to function at a high level. The first one is the willingness to assess how well we're functioning as a group. All right. How are we doing? And there's a lot of tools that can be used to do assessments. All right. But we are willing to ask ourselves as a group, how are we doing as a board? Okay. And if we don't do that, then what we are doing is repeating behavior. And repeating behavior, what's the old saying? If you keep doing what you've done, you're always going to get the same thing. And it doesn't mean everything needs to change, but it does mean that we want to be thoughtful about what are we doing and is it effective and efficient? Those are my guardrails. Is it effective and efficient? The other is a willingness to change. Okay. Are we as a group willing to change? And change is difficult for people. It's super difficult. And I'm going to put change into two categories. And I want you to think about your own board and consider when change is in front of you where this fits, because it offers a little context on the difficulty you might encounter in creating change. So some things that confront us are technical, what we call technical work, right? We need to choose a new company to help us with our audit or our accounting, right? That's a technical decision. We send out a request for a proposal, or we bring people in to be interviewed, and we make a decision, right? That's a technical thing, right? Um, Choosing to change our board member expectation statements to include new responsibilities is not a technical thing. It is an adaptive challenge. It is adaptive. And I say it's adaptive because what it requires is for people on your board to personally make some internal decisions about their willingness and desire to change. And so if you're able to decide what's in front of you and what your challenges are and put tactical, we're going to change the board meeting to Wednesday, versus we're going to fundamentally review our bylaws and make substantive changes. Those, a little bit technical, those might require behavior changes. And those take time. They take time and they can be very challenging. Okay. So, but willingness to change is super important. And then my final thing is accountability. We do not we want to avoid an environment where we are internally passing the buck, right? We are one group. When we vote on something, if there's six yeses and four nos, we leave the room and speak with one voice. The answer was yes. We don't get into what happened in the boardroom, but so we're accountable to each other, right? And we're also accountable to the public. I often say, listen, if something bad happens, God forbid, something horrific happens in our organization, sure, yeah, you're in the news. You captured a headline in a local paper, and people are named, but the board is ultimately responsible for the organization, and so the ultimate responsibility is yours as a board member. Okay, so operating at a high level and asking questions and making changes and making sure we're functioning at a high level is really super important for our organizations to be successful at the work we do. I don't lose sight of the fact that what we're trying to do is meet our mission. In fact, do as much of meeting our mission as we can. And so that's sort of the North Star on that. I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna see if there are questions, comments, thoughts, anything, Cassie, maybe I missed in the chat or came up by all means.
Yeah, Dave, we do have a question. So I live and serve in a small community with lots of boards. It's hard to recruit new board members, and few people are willing to serve on boards. We try to get like maybe donors involved in the board, but that is even hard to do. Any tips on recruiting new board members?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. And I don't know how small the community is. I'm going to make some observations because I think what you share is real. I'm not saying this is not. I want to offer a different perspective on it and then offer a tip or two. Um, One is that I think we have in the sector presented what does board service look like, and we've done it wrong. And so I think part of this is to create a matrix of the skill sets you need and be very specific about what you're looking for and spend more time courting those potential board members rather than calling them on a Tuesday and electing them that night. So I think people are willing to participate at a higher level if they know what the job is. So share with them the role, talk to them about their interest. I don't doubt that it's more challenging in a smaller environment. I'm 100% sure that's true. I think this has to be about how do we get very strategic about who we're looking for in the skill sets and even share with them why it's important that we're talking to them as individuals. Okay. And I get it's difficult for sure. Okay.
Yeah, great.
I,
Thank you.
s- I saw
Yeah.
a question about strategy to keep the board engaged. Cassie, if you were going to say that. Um so it's interesting. I have a colleague who created from BoardSource who created the board member life cycle, like you as individual board member. And she has, orientation, affiliation, engagement, right, renewal, involvement, all the things that we experience. And she is brilliant because she said the most important component of the board member experience is affiliation, which is really what your question is keeping the board engaged is a reflection of affiliation. Do I feel like I'm part of the group? So back to your question. What are you doing to make people feel part of the group? Okay. Do you have activities and functions throughout the year with the board that can bring them together that isn't business related, right? The social activities, the volunteer active. How are we engaging board members? The other thing is, depending on how large your board is, one of the things might be to review how you've organized that work. Sometimes we have either not enough committees or too many. And so what we're doing is creating an environment where we're just putting people to work with busy stuff and they're bored, right? The other final thing I'll say is you need to run a really good board meeting. And that requires two things. One is making sure the frequency makes sense. I always say that inertia, is interrupted. It's a killer to have boring board meetings where it's just show and tell and offering reports. Are we structuring them in a way to bring a big question that we can all talk about as a group or in small group? How are we having a board meeting that engages the intellectual capacity? And the other thing is frequency. Sometimes we meet too much, right? My sense now is the average is typical is every other month. I know boards that meet quarterly. Um, every month is a lot. I don't know what happens in 30 days and then what happens is board members start skipping meetings, and then you think they're not engaged. All these different components out there. Rebecca asked tips on finding a board to join. Rebecca, this is a great question. I'm going to give you I did a session for many years on joining a board, and I actually want to share this with you. I love that question. Um, what I would do is I would ask, do they have a board expectation statement? Rebecca, have them share with you the board expectation statement. What's required of a board member? I would also ask for them to share with you their financials, maybe their most recent audit or their budget. I think it's fair that a potential board member have an understanding of what the financial picture of the organization is. Um, I would encourage people who are wanting to join boards to meet some other board members. We go back to it's hard to find people. And you know, the reality is that we need to then have our board members going out and let's interact with potential board members rather than just identify and bring them. So I would encourage you to engage with board members directly. I mean, those are some key things that are important. If they have a strategic plan, maybe you take a look at that too. Like, make sure you know what it is the organization's all about, where they're headed. I mean, if there's a financial challenge, what the role is. And my final question, I'd ask them, why me? Now, I don't mean that to mean it shouldn't be you, but I'd be curious, have they put any thought to this? Why are they coming to me? Okay. Um, I see board service length, right? About board members leaving too early feels chaotic, right? So, Ben, I have a couple of rules in my work in doing this. One is you should always have term limits. That's a non-negotiable. And so that we're clear, term limits are the maximum amount of time someone can serve and must roll off the board. So they're not, well, there's terms are 3 years, but you can serve an undetermined number. That's not term limits, that's terms. So term limits. The most common I see is 2 3-year terms and then being off a year. You know, I think you have a separate question here potentially, which is board members leaving too early, feeling chaotic. The question I would ask is that a result of either term limits that are too short or a board experience that is resulting in people leaving? And I don't know either of those things, Ben. So I just offer them as potential questions to ask yourself. But 2 3-year terms. The other thing is, what is a way to engage people when they roll off the board? So leaving the board doesn't have to be leaving the organization. It is, what are the other opportunities to serve? And I've seen a lot of different models for that. Um, and Ahmad asked about the frequency of meeting the CEO and executive. Like I said, I was doing it monthly, and we're a national. The board I serve on is a national organization, so I think it's a matter of it depends. I love when Cassie, I can answer a question with it depends. It depends. And I say that because, is the organization in crisis? Is it necessary you talk every week? Is everything going along great? And you think, having coffee once a month makes sense. I mean, and the other issue is, your board chair is going to change. And that board chair may have a different kind of time available or a different philosophy about how this works. I do know, Ahmad, excuse me, that um, there are CEOs who, when the new chair comes in, have kind of like an agreement, like not an enforceable, but like kind of a written agreement. Like, I'll always get back to you in 24 hours. I'll never put anything on the agenda you're unaware of, that kind of thing. And that might be helpful too. It certainly sets in place some good behaviors that are worth maintaining, right? Some habits, they're effective and efficient, and we should keep doing them. So, okay. Any questions I might have missed there, Cassie?
Dave, I think that you answered, there might have been one more, but I want to make sure that we have enough time
Oh,
to cover. Yeah, we want to talk about the opportunity for coaching. So I'm going
okay.
to keep us moving, and then maybe if we have time at the end, we can come back to that last question. I think we have one more question remaining.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
let's see. I've got a little bit of a delay. There we go. So I mentioned earlier that as a part of these board engagement support services, that we are offering the opportunity for 25 youth serving organization, so leaders, to participate and receive what would be 2 individualized coaching sessions with Dave and 2 of his colleagues. Am I back?
I don't think you were
Oh,
gone.
oh, okay. I apologize that my internet's cutting out.
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you, with Dave and 2 of his colleagues. These sessions will occur March through June of this year. One of the things that Dave and I had a conversation about is we would really like a board member to be present and to participate in these sessions, although it's not required. For those organizations that are selected to participate in the coaching session, they will also get a Board Source annual subscription. And so as a part of this, someone will receive access to, Dave mentioned, a board self-assessment, again, annually, to help the board set priorities. Access to what would be on-demand training through Board Source. Ask an email assistance, and again, access to a wealth of resources and a resource library available through Board Source. So access to lots of resources, what would be for 1 year. In terms of eligibility, so we want an organization to be an established youth serving organization located in Indiana that provides programming directly for Indiana youth. So working with youth ages 5 to 18, be a 501c3 organization or the IRS code. I'm not going to list that out for you. You can read. Or if you are a multi-service organization, that you can demonstrate at least 75% of services are youth and family related. And again, this is because the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project was designed to support youth workers that are working with youth ages 5 to 18 and their families, and must have provided those services for at least 3 full years as of December 31st, 2025. So you can scan the QR code here to apply. Again, you're going to get a copy of this presentation later today. But the deadline to apply is February 28th. I would recommend you apply soon because our spots are filling up. So, and this opportunity is only available for what would be 25 youth serving organizations. Available to all is future webinars with Dave's colleagues. So we are hosting webinars in April, effective board structures in May, and in June. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we do have future webinars, again, that are available to everyone. These can be found at youthworkerwellbeing.org or iyI.org/events, or again, you can scan the QR code here to be redirected to our events page. If you are not yet connected with the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project, we are offering a variety of programs and services to support youth serving organizations and youth workers. So no cost access to telemedicine and virtual mental health services, grant opportunities for organizations to pilot and implement strategies again, to either sustain or improve employee well-being in the workplace. And then also a webinar series for organizational leaders related to human resources benefits. So lots of different opportunities for you to connect to the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project. We have 14,000 plus youth workers enrolled from more than 300 youth serving organizations across the state. And again, this is no cost to employers, no cost to youth workers, and it is for full and part-time employees. So if you're not yet signed up, scan the QR code to learn more. Again, we mentioned we have additional webinars and Youth Worker Wellbeing project events. So in April, if you are located in Orange, Lake, or Putnam County, we're coming to you to share more information about the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project. And then in April, May, June, and August, we are offering additional webinars, again, related to human resources and benefits. And all of this is in the lens, again, supporting youth workers, improving workplaces for youth workers. If you're not yet connected with your outreach manager in your region, connect with your outreach manager. These are great individuals to be able to connect you to all of IYI services, upcoming events. Again, this will be in the slide deck that you'll receive later today to be able to connect with your outreach manager for both local events and then additional webinars and opportunities. And then we want your feedback. So IYI is a data-driven organization. We want your feedback about today's presentation. You have the opportunity. We have 1 more minute. You can scan the QR code. You don't have to do the survey now, but you can scan your QR code, do the survey. The evaluation will also be sent to you in a follow-up email. Dave, thank you so much for joining us here today. And then from the Youth Worker Wellbeing Project, we appreciate you sharing with us, spending time with us, and joining us. Thank you so much. And this concludes today's presentation.